Hello and welcome to another week of Fellowship in Essential Oils. I'm so excited. This is one of my favorite oils to be talking about today. Today we're diving into jasmine. How are you, Liz?
I'm all right, but I'm not sure that we should be doing this in a daytime because jasmine's definitely a nighttime oil, don't you think?
Without a doubt, I would never argue that is definitely an oil of the night. And as we kind of dive deeper through jasmine, we're going to be, I'm sure everyone will agree with us as well. Now, I was just kind of reflecting before we started this episode about all the different essential oils that we have discussed so far. And I don't think we've actually discussed an absolute yet. And jasmine is generally available as an absolute, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly right. And there are two really good jasmine absolutes. So jasmine grandiflorum or jasmine officinale, sometimes it's called, which is kind of like the usually from India. And then there is jasmine sambac, which is also known as the Arabian sambac. And normally I wouldn't give a shout out to an essential oil company, but I can tell you that the most beautiful oil in any of my boxes is a jasmine sambac that was made by the lovely Musa Khan and sold through Kathy's Attars. It's stunning. And
Hmm.
the chemistry between Sambac and grandiflorum is very different. I used to see people talking about Sambac. I used to think just being snobs, but no, it's completely different. And it's very heavy. It's very heavy in indole, which is the bit that makes you sleepy and is like mesmeric. And of course, like jasmine flowers are used a lot in rituals in India because they are mesmeric.
Hmm.
And actually, it's not accidental. That it was a deliberate thing to say that it's an evening kind of oil because, of course, the jasmine emits its fragrance in the evening. It's not interested in bees. It has no place for bees. It's the moths that pollinate it. The nighttime, lots of like nighttime insects, and also bats. So the more scent it brings, the more insects come out, and better it is for the bats. So it's very much a beautiful evening time, like hypnotism that's going on.
Very much so. I'm amazed that you love it so much because it has nothing to do with bees.
No, not at all. But actually, do you know, I get a bit sick of sharing all my plants with the bees.
Yeah. So the
I
jasmine's
can't I can't grow it actually. There's around about 200 different varieties of jasmine. The only one that I can grow really well here is winter jasmine, but it does grow really well in this country. My youngest sister Angela has huge, great big bushes of it. It doesn't like me.
Yeah, I must admit when I'm talking to people about jasmine, most people or several people have a bit of a negative experience because they've got a bush in their yard or something like that, and it just intoxicates them to the point where they don't like jasmine, which we might dive into a little bit more as we go
It
on
is,
why that
it
could
is
be. But yeah,
Yeah, it is thickly, isn't it? So like I do sometimes. We spend a lot of time in like garden centres, and I quite often bring one home, and the silent one will go, oh, not again. Makes me feel sick having it in the living room, but I just absolutely love it.
mm. Now, would you share a little bit more about what an absolute actually is? Because we hear this term sometimes with floral oils and a few other oils of it's jasmine absolute. Is that an essential oil? What is that?
Well, so essential oil is a very vague term, really. So we would usually say that essential oils are distilled, but then we have like orange and lemon essential oils, and they're not distilled; they're pressed from the rinds, from the peel, exocarp. But an absolute, there can be many different reasons for using to making an absolute, but usually because it's a flower that it's extremely delicate and it just wouldn't stand the rigors of having steam pass through it, and that's the case with jasmine. We also sometimes hear enfleurage, so you can get a jasmine enfleurage, which is even more uber beautiful. And what that is like the traditional way of making the oil. So they have the ladies usually have a great big tray of oil, so like maybe coconut oil or jojoba or something like that, that really will take on the fragrance. And then the flowers are laid on the top of it, and it's left out in the sun, and then the oil saturates into the fat that's on the tray, and they take the flowers off and they do it again, and I think they do that over 3 days. Very, very intense process. So because of that, that is a very expensive process. So then solvent extraction, which is what an absolute is, becomes a more cost-effective process. However, if you've ever been to a plant that does solvent extraction, they're like enormous factories in their own right, just this one big machine. And they use usually hexane to absorb the oil out, to take it, and then to sometimes they'll distill it off to do it. But I absolutely love absolutes. Rose absolute is my favorite. I much prefer it to rose essential oil, and jasmine absolute is absolutely stunning.
And typically an absolute tends to take out more aromatic compounds than a steam distillation, so you do get that really rich kind of aroma, don't you?
You get a thickness to it, don't you? And now I don't know if I'm getting this exactly right, but certainly when you do a distillation, the molecule needs to be naturally lighter than the steam would be for it to be able to carry it across. So lots of molecules stay where they are, which is why we're into another realm again now. CO2s are so useful because they're good at being able to get heavier molecules through. And in particular, like when we're thinking about jasmine, we think about sesquiterpenes. These are the rich ones that are so good for emotional balance. Well, sesquiterpenes, sesqui means many. So it's a many molecule thing, so therefore heavy to lift. So the essential oils aren't very good at getting heavy molecules out.
Now, most people are familiar with jasmine as an absolute, but wanted to share a really interesting story of a farmer and a distiller in Egypt. Now, many bad things happened during COVID, but this is actually a positive COVID story because there is large amounts of jasmine that are grown in Egypt. And during COVID, most of the farmers and the distillers lost their work or their industry because 90% of who was buying the jasmine was for the fragrance industry. And of course, because we're all sitting at home on the couch, no one cares who we smell like. So sales just plummeted. So this farmer had been trying to crack the code of how to steam distill jasmine flowers. And because he had so much extra, I guess, flowers and blossoms at his availability, he was actually able to work that out. So now there is actually an available on the market a jasmine essential oil. I had both the absolute and the jasmine from the same flowers. The absolute is almost as though you're smelling, like you're sticking your nose in the flower, whereas the essential oil is definitely jasmine-y, but it's more like the wind is wafting past and it's kind of blowing through your window type of thing. So it's a little bit lighter, but still just as magical and I love that word, mesmeric. I've never heard the word mesmeric before, but yeah, very mesmeric in a more subtle and gentle way. So yeah, I thought that was really exciting that, essential oils are continuing to evolve. We're finding new plants, but we're also finding different ways to get the essential oils out.
Yeah, I think that is fraught with difficulties from a marketing point of view, though, because so many people will write what is jasmine essential oil for, and then we have to go, well, it's not an essential oil. It's an absolute. And then suddenly, there's loads of other people on the market saying they're selling jasmine essential oil because that's what people are looking for, and it's not. It's an absolute. So I think he's going to come up against difficulties there. But it'd be interesting to watch what's happening. I would absolutely love to smell it. It sounds amazing. I know you showed me like a breakdown of the analysis, and what's interesting is, although it's according to the sources, it smells more like jasmine sambac. Its chemistry is really close to grandiflorum, so presumably that's where it came from. But they have really different chemistry. So grandiflorum is predominantly benzyl acetate and benzyl benzoate. And benzoate in particular is a skin irritant, so it has an IFRA guideline that we should only use it to 0.7%. Anything more than that is likely to irritate the skin. However, Sambac barely has that, so it has 4.3% benzyl acetate, as opposed to 20 odd in the grandiflorum. No benzyl acetate at all. Sorry, benzyl benzoate at all in there. When you compare grandiflorum in terms of linalool, 3.65%. In Sambac, 13.9%. So we can see that the actions are very different, and Sambac is safer, although more expensive. So we would not be looking at 0.7% dilution. We can go as high as 4%. And because it's much richer in a constituent called indole, indole is the sexy, sleepy, hypnotic, mesmeric molecule. So we can see that one will be the more uber sexy, uber relaxing than the grandiflorum, but that doesn't negate what grandiflorum can do. It's a fabulous soothing oil. And one of my favorite things to say is there's well, I think that Jasmine, or the name Jasmine, means this is God's will. And there's a Sanskrit saying that says, where there is jasmine, there can be no worries. And I think that's absolutely beautiful.
Very much so. I want to ask you one bit on the chemistry. Is benzyl acetate, I may be getting this confused with another constituent, but is that the constituent that's normally attributed to giving essential oils that like pear-like or floral smell, like it can be in other oils like gardenia and so on? Is that benzyl acetate, or am I thinking something else?
So kind of you're right, kind of you're wrong. So acetates belong to esters, and they have that pear-like fragrance.
Got you.
So I don't know whether other countries do, but that we learned that actually in school in chemistry. We made the pear drops smell. It is the smell of esters, yeah. And I mean, esters are a really interesting kind of chemical group in their own right. They're really important to pharmaceutical development as well as perfumery. So like benzyl acetate and benzyl benzoate, you'll find in perfumery. But esters have so many uses within pharmaceuticals, because this taste and smell, pear drops, makes the drugs taste better and smell better, so they're sort of more palatable. But also esters are very good at making things absorb faster. So if you've got like a topically based medicine, it will go in faster if it's got some kind of ester in it as well. So I was fascinated last year to read the most extraordinary clinical trial. So we're going a bit off track here, because it's not actually jasmine essential oil, it's jasmine tea, because it was done by people who were traditional Chinese medicine people. And they were like, well, no, we don't need to prove that it's antidepressant. We know that it is. We don't need to prove that it's so good for the colon and the intestines. We know that it is. I'll come back to that. What we want to prove is that the antidepressant action is because of its action upon the colon and the intestines, which was so clever. So there's so many different dimensions to this study, and I've got to try and remember a whole host of different abbreviations, but let's see how I get on. So depression as a starting point has many different clinical attributes. But one thing that we know is that it is associated with low levels of serotonin. We don't know whether the low levels of the serotonin cause the depression, or the depression causes the low levels of serotonin. We just know that it happens. We also know that a molecule, a protein called BDNF, that is brain-derived neurotropic factor, within the hippocampus also has a bearing. So low levels of BDNF are seen in depression. If you can attenuate those levels and lift those, what happens is the body actually triggers its own antidepressant response, and depression starts to lift. We also know, strangely, that an enzyme, sorry, a protein called GLP-1 is involved. Now, the reason why I say strangely is because this is kind of like a molecule that is the big hurrah in medicine at the moment, because it's extremely clever for weight loss. So in this country, the main drug that is a GLP-1 drug is called semaglutide, or Ozempic, and it's been in the news a lot, not only because it's good for weight loss, but because people actually can't get their hands on it for what they're supposed to be using it for, which is diabetes. Because it's so good for weight loss, people are buying it, and it's all out. So it makes an effect of something like 4 times the amount of weight that you would lose because of this activation of this particular thing. So what it does is it influences a hormone called an encretin, and the encretin is activated when you eat. So what's clever about this is it goes, well, when it's activated, it puts insulin into the bloodstream, but only when you need it. So the reason why people lose so much weight is because this incretin sends out the insulin. The insulin deals with the blood sugar, takes it out of the system. It has no chance to make itself into glycogen and then to activate the liver and then turn into fat. Doesn't have any chance. So basically, use the blood sugar out of the system. But what's really interesting is it has so many other actions besides. So another reason why it might affect weight loss is because it makes you feel full very quickly. So if you can activate that, and this is kind of one of the key things with intermittent fasting, that you have this one spike of blood sugar and it doesn't happen again. So that helps it work on its own, but you should feel full faster, so your appetite goes down. Also, it stops sugar cravings, so you don't, because you haven't got this up and down of your blood sugar, then you haven't got the sugar cravings. But then it goes even wider. So it also affects blood pressure. It's also cardioprotective, and bizarrely, it works on the brain. So it is neuroprotective and antioxidant, and also involved in things like Alzheimer's and diabetes. So it protects against that neurodegeneration. So this is a wide set of things that it will do. So in this trial, remembering that we are actually talking about a trial now because it went so long back. So in this trial, rats, not people, rats were given jasmine tea to drink. So what was really interesting is when the GLP-1 was activated, they got a choice of 2 different teas to drink, normal jasmine tea and sugary jasmine tea. Before the GLP-1, it was like, yes, I do want the sugary one. But then when it was activated, went, no, I don't want the sugary one anymore. I'm going to have the normal one. They put on less weight. But then also they assessed the microbiome. So the microbiota in our stomach is not an area that I'm familiar with hugely, but we have trillions of them, these healthy bacteria. We all know about the healthy bacteria. There's around about 100 different varieties that fall into around about 6 different families. And depression is linked with a deficit in the richness, but also the diversity. So when people are tested who've got like major depressive disorder, as opposed to people who have healthy depressive disorder. I wouldn't like to be the chemist that pokes around the poo, but that's what they do. And they're able to see that people who are depressed have got very little of this microbiota and very few species. The jasmine tea, we can guess where this is going, increased all the number of the different microbiota. And so there was far more of them, but also far more varieties. So these microbiota can be like affected by stress and diet and stuff like that. So that helped to remedy that. They also were able to prove that through the enteric nervous system, that is the gut to brain, that the change in the microbiota then changed the GLP, so those clever little molecules, they are able to pass through the blood-brain barrier. The BDNF, which were the ones that are in the hippocampus, only stay in the hippocampus, but they changed and became much bigger too. So they were able to say the jasmine affected the microbiota, which then affected the depression. Then, because this is a really comprehensive, like pages long study, then they said, come on then, mice, show us what you can do. So these had been rats. These had been depressed rats, and they put them into a maze with, I think, 16 different holes. And before they were like, I'm staying in the dark, don't want to do anything. But then after they'd had the jasmine tea, they were like scurrying on 4 feet, trying to work out where they're going. Then like, oh, I'm going to try and look over the top, see what's going on. So they become more creative and more motivated. Also, in a forced swim test, we do not like talking about these tests. They normally in a forced swim test, it would be like, I'll do a little bit, but actually it's going to defeat me. I'm not going to do any more. And they just lie there. But they fought and they fought and they swum and they swum and they swum. And so they were able to show that not only had the gut have been affected and actually the chemistry of the brain was affected, but the psychology of the rat had changed because of the jasmine. Now, to stress that this was rats, this was jasmine tea, not essential oil, not humans, but it absolutely imitates exactly what you would expect to see in a human.
Because when we do talk about jasmine, you often hear, now we're talking about the absolute and the essential oil, depression is one of the big things that comes up, isn't it?
And anxiety, yeah.
Yeah. Is that where you tend to reach for jasmine, for those kind of elevating the mood aspects?
I use it ever such a lot. So if I get anxious, because I'm sure that people are grasping now that I am quite an anxious person, it's my go-to oil to use. It's aphrodisiac. It's tremendously good. We've talked about the gut biome, tremendously good for the intestines and for the colon. So if somebody has got colitis, I wouldn't say dyspepsia, that's not the word I'm trying to say. The other thing that begins with D that's a bit like that. Anyway, bad stomachs.
Diverticulitis?
That's the one, diverticulitis. Yep. Exactly right, that. Colitis, Crohn's disease, irritable bowel syndrome. When you look at the slides that have been like the histography of like something that's been treated with jasmine, it repairs the lining so well. It's so important for that. And also oxytocin, I'll talk at length about oxytocin in different ways. So very good for, the whole thing of bonding has got to come into depression as well, hasn't it? But in terms of it's what helps us to have orgasms, helps us to have erections, it helps us to go into labour, it helps the milk come in afterwards. All of those things would be applications for jasmine, which is why it would be contraindicated in the first 37 weeks of pregnancy, because we don't want to have this contraction of the womb, because that's what it does, it contracts.
Yeah.
So in the same way then, if somebody has got endometriosis or painful periods, that kind of tonic effect on the womb, absolutely fantastic.
And as a double there, it becomes a beautiful natural fragrance as well when we're using artificial perfumed colognes. That's obviously going to be neurotoxic and increasing your toxic load. So another reason, if you are having, issues around the menstrual cycle, jasmine's going to support rather than as a, as you've just mentioned, but also by wearing it or you choosing that nicely diluted as your fragrance, you're actually benefiting your body in two ways as well.
Yeah, definitely. And just going back, I was kind of recapping in my head while you were talking to make sure I covered what I wanted to say and make sure I hadn't said something wrong. A lot of these oils that you can't use till late on in pregnancy would be contraindicated for breastfeeding. Actually, that's not the case because it's very good for helping breastfeeding. But bearing in mind that it's a very strong smelling and therefore probably strong tasting essential oil, and it will come through the milk. So if somebody is breastfeeding and baby goes, I don't want to feed anymore, chances are that would be the first thing I'd say, stop using your oils, especially if it's actually myrrh, but jasmine would be the same because it is really potent. But one of the areas of research, and there's quite a lot of writing about lactation with jasmine, is because if somebody's on antipsychotic medication, that stops your periods and it stops you being able to breastfeed. The milk stops. And so there's quite a lot of research into using jasmine as an inhalant to kind of bring that menstruation back, to bring the milk back in as well.
It's interesting that kind of almost has this link to motherhood as well. And for me, kind of moving more into the spiritual realm, when Vanessa and I were writing our book, Gifts of Essential Oils, we wanted to personify the oils so that people could get to know them a little bit better. Not to go, oh, this is a girl oil or a boy oil, but to kind of bring that yin or that yang energy through. And when we got to jasmine, we kind of came to a bit of a halt because, with the flowers, they've got that feminine energy like rose or neroli and so on. But in some places, you'll hear rose being called the queen of the oils and jasmine being referred to as the king. And so we're like, is that feminine or is it masculine? Now, then I started thinking, well, it's a white flower. And white flowers are generally associated with the moon. And when you think about what we actually need to get a full moon, so to give you a bit of a demonstration, if you imagine my head is the earth. To get a full moon, we have the sun on one side, and the sun in most cultures is the epitome of the yang or the masculine energy. And a full moon, a new moon, is the moon's on the same side, and so it's shining on the back, so we can't see the moon. To get a full moon, we have the feminine or the moon on exactly the opposite side of the earth. So what we have from an earth perspective is masculine or yang and feminine yin in balance, in harmony. And that gives us a full moon. And when masculine and feminine are in harmony, whether it be a man and a woman, they make babies, or when we balance our masculine and feminine between the intention and that drive of the masculine and the nurturing and the caring of the feminine, that's when magic happens. Now, we all know when is the most magical time of the month? Full moon time. And for me, jasmine is full moon. There is no better oil for the full moon than jasmine.
Yeah, queen of the night, I always call her. And,
yes.
and I agree completely. Moon medicine, yeah.
Yeah. So she, throughout cultures, she's been used for different things throughout the night. We referred to, she's a great aphrodisiac. She is a really great one for when you want to, there's lots of love oils, but I would actually lean into jasmine. Jasmine's got this reputation for being when we're ready to meet our soulmate. It's a very soul love kind of oil, drawing people together that are meant to be together. So, maybe if you're, a 12-year-old doing a bit of love magic, you probably don't want to use jasmine straight away unless you want to be stuck with your first boyfriend forever. And trust me, from us that have been through a few, you definitely don't want to stay with your first most of the time. So, but when you kind of feel that you've done your work and you're like, okay, I'm really ready to bring someone into my life that's connecting on a deep level. And we often find that, and when we're talking about soulmates, it doesn't have to be a romantic level, but it's just someone who sees you on that spiritual level. And sometimes for people that are really quite spiritual, it can be beneficial to have a non-spiritual partner just to ground you a little bit. But if you're trying to bring either a soulmate in that kind of real spiritual connection, or even what we sometimes call your soul family, then jasmine's absolutely amazing. It is renowned for being a really great oil for winning the favor of the gods. So a really simple ritual that you can do under the full moon is a drop of jasmine on the hand, and just like we do with the birthday cake, you kind of, what's your wish? And then it's said to give your prayers wings. So using jasmine to actually carry your message out to the universe on the full moon is one of my favorite things to do. And being such an expensive oil, you know, Liz seems to be showering in it from all the way she's using it, but I actually really reserve it for those special occasions because it is so precious. And then I kind of have that aromatic anchor that triggers me back to this is something magical, this is something special. So I really love it for those spiritual and that soul kind of work and that full moon work. So, it used to annoy my ex partner a lot, but Jasmine was always in the diffuser on that 3 days of the full moon to bring me in harmony with the full moon energy and kind of relax me as well. And I will kind of go off on one little tangent there. It's really important how you start the day on a full moon because the full moon is an amplifier of energy. So, if we start the day running late or we stub our toe or we have an argument, it amplifies. And then by the end of the night, what happens? We become a lunar tick. So even if you're not someone who tends to meditate in the morning, even if you can get up a little bit earlier in the morning, that's why I like to put my jasmine on and kind of set that scene. Because whatever you start the day, that'll escalate. And then by the time you get to the full moon night, you're ready to do that magic and whatever that may be that you've decided whether it's something casual or something quite magical. But jasmine, I feel, from what we've been discussing today, is a really nice consort for your full moon work.
Yeah, and I think, you're quite right. I do bathe in it because I am almost like the archetypical Pitta dosha person. It's rare. Usually people are like a combination of things, but both my husband and I are like one. So I'm Pitta dosha, he's Kapha dosha. But so like, if you look at my skin, how pale it is, it's so reactive to the sun, it's reactive to chemicals. Luckily, I didn't really suffer from acne as a kid. That was my poor sister's affliction. But that is like a Pitta dosha thing as well. And jasmine is the ultimate Pitta dosha oil, that it cools down hotness. And Pitta dosha, when it goes out of kilter, is all about inflammation. So like the fire of Agni goes out of kilter, so you get like inflamed skin, inflamed tempers. I always talk about the inflammation of cystitis, I think there was a really funny quote that Eddie Murphy said, fire shoots out of my those kind of real, it really hurts. All of those are tremendous for uses for jasmine. So or any of that kind of balancing of heat, but of everything that to balance Pitta dosha, lying out under the moonlight is the best possible thing. Moonlight is cooling, whereas Vata need the sunshine. But so it goes right across the board, really, that moon and Pitta dosha association.
Yeah. One thing I even love about the jasmine flowers as well is they are actually like a little star shape. So I often imagine that, when we have this field of stars above us, it's almost mirroring the field, the stars here on Earth. So it's a bit of an as above, so below. So it's very much about connecting with the heavens in that way as well.
Yeah, and when I'm talking to people about jasmine, somebody hasn't encountered it before. You're probably too young to remember a film called Passage to India.
I haven't seen it. I may have heard of it, but yeah.
So is it, if I remember rightly, an E.M. Forster book? And what it's about, without being too many spoilers, is this young woman that sort of starting to flower in life goes to India, and she comes from a very sort of well-to-do Edwardian times background, where she's been taught to be a lady. But of course, everywhere she encounters in India, there's these beautiful temples and there's erotic pictures and spices and all of that. And she thinks, she goes to this one temple and she's overwhelmed by the eroticism of it, and she thinks that she's been that this beautiful man who's looked after her, this Indian man. She thinks that he's attacked her and he's sexually whatever, given her advances that she didn't want, but she hasn't. It's the overwhelming nature of this different culture that's happened to her, and I think, and to me, that seems to be the story of Jasmine. You know, that you go from being this quite reserved person, and if somebody is suffering from, you know, any kind of sexual frigidity or worries about sexual abuse and can't, it is enticing in that way to be able to kind of bring things into a relaxing, more evocative and erotic state.
Mm-hmm. Kind of expanding on that as well, I find, you know, really interesting. I've become fascinated in looking at why people don't like the smell of different essential oils and why they do. And sometimes, I think we've discussed in past episodes, sometimes you just had a bad experience where the grandmother you hated loved lavender, so you hate lavender. But I found with jasmine, those that have no explanation for jasmine, it's to do with the magic of the world. And almost as though jasmine, to me, I was thinking about it just before we jumped on today, jasmine is about that Disney belief, believing that the world is still magical. And I find that those have become a bit too realistic, and that can be a bit glum and depression and all those types of things as well. You know, they don't like jasmine, because jasmine is, remember the magic of the world. Remember, you know, the awe that we get when we sit out under the stars and kind of just, wow, like how big is the world and how amazing it all is, and everything falls in perspective. So I think jasmine's a beautiful one for just helping us to fall back in love with life, which makes it really, really nice for that depression and those other things that we've been talking about today.
I think that's absolutely true. I also think it's difficult for people who can't let go of control, who are inhibited by life and a bit scared of life, because it does kind of make you a bit like, oh, I don't act the same way as I normally act. And that's not a deliberate thing. You know, you smell it and you start to be like, this isn't me. I don't feel like this. And so I think it's one of those oils that does really quite need a good sense of, well, a good case history if you're using it in therapy, because you don't want to push somebody too hard who's got really good reasons for those like defenses. But yeah, I think the more sensuous people are the people who like it. The people who don't have like this strong sort of sexual magnetism, kind of a bit like with it.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're exactly right. It sounds like, was it Passage to India, the movie?
Yeah.
That sounds like Jasmine in a movie, kind of.
Exactly. That is exactly that. That's what I always say. You know, the way that she was overwhelmed and you should go and find it, because it is a stellar movie. But she's like, you can really feel like, you know, that he hasn't done anything, but you feel like, I get what happened to her, and it's the same thing with Jasmine. You're like, I know how you got moved, just and I can see why it's like intimidating to you and a bit unnerving to kind of take that journey.
Yeah. Now we've kind of talked about all this kind of very evocative energy about it. Chakra wise, what chakra would you attribute jasmine to?
So I would say all of them.
Wow. Okay. All of them. Why is that?
So this idea of safety in sex, and how, so going through the physicality of the chakras, if you like, more than the sort of spiritual. So root chakra stuff is about like being anal retentive and being able to go to the toilet properly, you know. So all of this effect on the colon, and the intestines and rectum, all of that is not only solar plexus but also base chakra. And remember that we've said with jasmine there can be no worries, so therefore we're not worried about our foundations. We're safe because jasmine makes us that way. It's very obvious why sacral, you know, so this is almost like a courtesan kind of energy that's going on. Solar plexus I've spoken to. Heart chakra it's so loving, you know, it is like a romantic, seductive evening after dinner. It definitely clears the mind, so stops worry, so that you can think more clearly, and also in terms of opening the crown chakra, so that connection to the magic and to the cosmic energies that are going on.
Yeah.
Throat chakra, I didn't say, but I think it's got like, well, in bee medicine we say it's got honeyed tongue. You know, it says the right things, doesn't it?
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. I think if I had to pick one of the 7 chakras, I'd probably go to the sacral. But I tend to attribute it. Last week when we explored lemongrass, I talked about the incarnator chakra, which is an energy center below the feet. There's a common one that's spoken about quite a lot now called the soul star chakra. Said to be about 30 centimeters above the head. And whereas your crown chakra is about your relationship with your soul's mission and what you're here to do, the soul star chakra kind of takes us out into that kind of greater connection with the cosmos, in how we connected to the stars, to the angels, to the guides, to the gods, all those different types of things as well. And I find because of Jasmine such galactic energy about it, and you know that it is like it brings the heaven, it mirrors the heavens down on earth as it grows with those beautiful stars in the fields, that it's a really nice one for that kind of feeling connected to the cosmos, and even connected to what is I like to call your spiritual team, which is your, you know, your ancestors, your guides, your angels, your animal totems, whatever kind of spiritual team that you feel is there to help you out in that way, and a really nice one for communicating with them and feeling connected to them as well. So Jasmine, yeah, I love it for the soul star chakra, and that energy center is often associated with a bit of a pearl or a mauve kind of color, kind of a lightning of that violet for the crown chakra. So that's where I'd place my Jasmine.
Interesting. Planet, you said moon. Any other thoughts?
Well, no, definitely the moon. No, probably if I had to pick one oil for the moon, it would be that. And we talked about neroli a few weeks ago. I find neroli and jasmine are a really nice pairing. Jasmine kind of gets the universe to do its bit, and neroli, we talked about how it gets you to do your bit. So I find them together can be a really nice duo. Sometimes
together?
what I
can't imagine that. That sounds horrible to me.
What I'd often do is I'd put neroli on the left arm, or the arm that you don't write with, for bringing in, okay, what do I need to do? And that jasmine for sending out into the universe. That's what I want to communicate with the universe. And a bit of an anointing, and let the two dance together. Give it a shot. Some people might love it. Some people might not. Yeah.
Yes. So my favourite pairing is, well, it's not, it's a triple. So jasmine, lemon and clove. I adore that synergy.
Wow, I'm trying to mentally sniff that in my mind. I've never combined them, because I must admit I don't blend jasmine much. I'm such a purist in that way, but I'll have to give that a shot.
It came up from doing like drawing 3 cards with the tongue of the tree cards, and so when you work that way, you come up with like synergies that you would go, oh, I would never have thought of that, and I was like, oh, this is so beautiful.
Yeah. So jasmine is definitely a magical oil, and we've covered a lot today, but we'll definitely dive into a lot more also in our masterclass. Remember, if you haven't got your ticket yet, there's only a few weeks left until we dive in on the 5th of October. The link and the discount code, wink, wink, is below. So make sure you grab that and before the discount runs out, and because we'd love to see you there. So anything else that I think we've done, Jasmine, pretty well today.
No, I have remembered something else that I wanted to say. Very good for scarring. So because it's antibiotic, tremendous for acne, but also guards against scarring.
That's a good one, definitely, for sure. Well, we'll see you again next week when we dive into our next essential oil. Until then, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and take care of Mother Earth. She gives us our beautiful jasmine flowers.
Bye-bye.